Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today to our Meet a Member interview series. My name is Luke Bader. I'm Director of Membership and Programs at the Fair Institute. And today I have two guests on it's Meet a Members podcast, I should say. We have Zach Cossairt, who's the Integrated Risk Program Manager at Equinix, and Alan Wilson, who is Director of Cybersecurity, Governance, Risk, and Compliance at BECU. And they are the new co-chairs of the newly founded Seattle chapter of the Fair Institute. Gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us, Luke. Looking forward to the conversation. Looking forward to rolling out the new chapter of the Institute.
Yes, awesome. And I'll start off right at the top and say, folks in the Seattle area, we are hosting our first chapter meeting on March 13th of the new Seattle Fair Institute chapter. So we'll have a link in the article text for this blog so that you can register there and you can meet Zach and Alan at the meeting. And so you can learn more about what we're going to be presenting at the meeting too, right from there. But without further ado, let's jump into a little bit of this interview to hear more about you both and your backgrounds. Zach, you've done one of these before. You've presented at a couple of FairCon, so I think I'm going to start with Alan, if that's okay with you. Alan, tell us a little bit about how you first heard about Fair, heard about the Fair Institute, and started to get involved with the community.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, or whatever time it is where you are. Yeah, so the first exposure I really had to FAIR when I came into the role of director over the Cyber GRC program. We already had a program, Risk Lens, within BECU. So I inherited Risk Lens from the prior person that owned it, and yeah, it took a little while to get up to speed. So I tried to engage with FAIR and the FAIR Institute and try to really understand some of the mechanics behind it. I had an appreciation for what it could do, but it certainly, especially in the earlier days, it really was it was a challenge, really, quite frankly, to use the solution in a way that was really worked for our organization. I've found that ever since, since we've began to really, leverage some of in the new solution that we're using, using the FIQs, being able to upload SIGs and SOCs and SIG lights and everything. It's becoming a lot more user friendly, and I'm really excited about the future that we have embracing FAIR and the FAIR Institute.
That's wonderful, Alan. And I'm going to stick with you for a second because I want you to kind of double tap into that and ask you what are those key benefits that you've seen so far in the way that quantification has brought to how you manage risk at your own personal level or at an organization level? What are some of those top benefits that you see?
Yeah, I'd say I'd probably break this question out into two parts. Programmatically, if we want to just think about it that way, moving from more of if you think about implicit to an explicit model of risk management,
Mhm.
whereby, previously well, we still do to this day, quite frankly, leveraging a CSF or cybersecurity framework, uh, risk assessments to identify gaps, as most risk organizations do, measuring the inherent and residual risk, and then, of course, taking action to remediate. So moving into the FAIR model, moving into that more of a explicit risk management. That's one of I would say, some you may argue or agree with this, but one of the foundational points of the FAIR model is that ability to explicitly measure and manage that cyber risk. Being able to identify specific and quantifiable risk targets, focused on actively managing against those targets and based on our risk appetite. So that's kind of from a programmatic perspective, just that shift that is really a paradigm shift in how we approach. And then from a specific use case, because we're a financial institution, we're highly regulated. We do what's called a CPST. It's a capital plan stress test every year. And being able to leverage FAIR, we can really hone in on what the loss exposure is, given any scenario. And that's something that we work out with our regulators, as far as, what it is we want to evaluate that year. But, looking at loss in terms of maximum loss event, a loss per event, average loss event, and then likelihood of event, and presenting in those terms, it really helps us present a solid case to our regulators that we really understand our environment and that we're on it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Super strong examples, and really great to hear that those are those tangible pieces that to show that you are on it to everybody, both internally and externally. That's wonderful to hear. Zach, how about you? A little bit of both questions. When did you first start hearing about FAIR and the Institute, and what are the benefits that you've seen since your kind of adoption of FAIR and quantification?
Yeah, absolutely. Great questions. For me, my exposure to FAIR came a little earlier than my current role. It really came back when I was doing my undergraduate at Penn State in security and risk analysis. And the foundational course of that degree was kind of the foundations of security and risk analysis. And of course, there had to be some heated discussions on the merits and the shortfalls of both sides, the quantitative and the qualitative kind of methodologies. And so Jack and Jack's book had just come out about a year prior, and the instructor had dropped FAIR as kind of an example of quantitative. So I went and grabbed that book, read it in less than a week the first time through, and I was sold from there. It was definitely what I wanted to do with kind of my career. And then from there, I kind of put my boxing gloves on and got into the discussion forum and schooled some of those qualitative folks, hit them with some knowledge. And I would say that kind of exposure really followed me throughout that entire degree plan as it kind of culminated in, conducting a quantitative risk analysis and presenting it to a panel of simulated decision makers. So I'd say that was kind of my first exposure to FAIR, and from there there was no real looking back. As far as the benefits, they're plentiful, and I'll probably break this into two parts, kind of like Alan did. But really, when you're looking at FAIR and quantification and how it helps us manage risk, you got to look at managing risk as making decisions, right? We're making decisions about what risks that we should be concerned about, which that we maybe shouldn't. And yes, that does happen, despite the status quo of information security that everything's on fire and everything needs to be fixed. That's not really our reality, right? We have to make trade-offs. And most importantly, how much money do we want to spend to mitigate those risks that are of concern to us? And my personal view when it comes to the benefits of risk quantification, it's really helped me to substitute measurement for quantification. And when you're thinking about measurement, you're thinking about reducing your uncertainty. And usually our decision quality improves as we have less uncertainty. So that's kind of how I've been able to really, really focus on the benefits. And those benefits in general are less subjectivity, right? It's never going to be a fully objective analysis. We know that it's always on a spectrum, but FAIR allows us to be more objective when we're gathering data and producing rigorous assessments and reducing noise or unwanted variance in our judgments by having a standardized process that we go through consistently so that we're not producing different results when different analysts conduct analyses. And then the comparison, right? You're able to effectively compare risks using apples to apples, and compare the alternatives that we might go through to mitigate those risks. Improving communications with business stakeholders, really speaking their language to gain more of that buy-in for those risk mitigation strategies that we want to roll out. And then more effective forecasting, right? Risk analysis, quantitative risk analysis is all about looking into the future. So it allows us to more objectively and proactively forecast our exposure and roll out risk management strategies that make sense for our organization, allow us to reach those business outcomes.
Absolutely. Agree with all of those points that you made, and definitely think that you said this a couple times in your answer, the importance of being able to communicate to the business, well, both maybe in with an internal risk team and be honest with ourselves and say, hey, look, actually these risks aren't what we thought that they were. They're actually bigger, or they're not as serious as we thought after we go through these exercises and running these scenarios. But then communicating that result to the business is still a hurdle, even with the translating risk into dollars and cents. So would love to hear a little bit from you both, a couple pointers for folks listening. What are some things that you have done that have worked in helping you communicate the results of your analysis to folks, maybe either within your own teams or to like the executive or the board's members of your organization. Alan, anything from you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Moving away from describing, I'll say, ordinal values of risk, 1 through 5,
Sure.
green, yellow, red, to a loss exposure conversation, really moves away from that obtuse perspective where the focus is on really justifying how and what the results are. How did you come up with these risk levels, to more of a, I think, Zach, you talked about this in your last piece, around more of a business outcome focused conversation. So, for example, here's a difference in a loss exposure by implementing this control or this solution versus this other solution, less on the other side. And then also, my advice is really to focus less on and this kind of goes hand in hand, less on the underlying mechanics, if you will, of the FAIR model, such as the impact and loss magnitude, primary and secondary loss exposure, that sort of thing, and more on the outcome. Something I heard this actually in one of the talks, but I really liked it, and I'd like to share this with everybody. And that is, and my son's a pilot, so this is a great analogy. So if you're sitting on the plane and the captain comes on and it's good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming into, I don't know, Hawaii, and starts talking about the air pressure. Nobody's going to care about that. So don't focus on those things, even though that's important, even though that has a role to play in how fast you're getting there, and the weather. Talk about the weather. It's a bright, beautiful day. We'll be on the ground in this many minutes. Do I have enough time for another gin and tonic before they cut off the cart? Those are the things that matter. So talk in terms of your audience, and really make the conversation focused on what they're interested in, and less on, as although important, less on the underlying mechanics.
That is a really good analogy and a great advice for pilots too. So I appreciate that. You can tell your son. Zach, any thoughts from you around this question?
Yeah, I could add a couple things. And that was a fantastic analogy. Thanks for that. Gave me a good laugh. When it comes to internal teams, most likely the team that you're working with, I work alongside 3 very, very talented and experienced risk engineers. So when it comes to communicating about risk quantification and risk in general, it's not necessarily making sure that we all know what the other is saying. We all know what the other is saying. But I think one of the most important things when you're doing, quality assurance, which is a huge part of our risk analyses, you should always be doing QA with your internal teams before you're showing these to external stakeholders. But during those quality assurance sessions, it's really important to just bring all of your assumptions out into the open. Right? When you're going through it, tell everyone on the team what you thought of when you were gathering data, when you were scoping out the analysis, when you were producing numbers, when you were making judgments. Bring that all out into the open so that there's no ambiguity. There's no point in making things ambiguous within your teams. You should all just be very, very transparent so that you can give those differing perspectives, have that dragonfly eye, get everybody be able to look at things from a different perspective so that you can provide valuable feedback before that analysis reaches those decision makers. And when you get to the point where you do reach those decision makers, this is arguably the most important part of what we do within risk management, because all these risk assessments that we do, it's really, I heard this awesome reference to, it's all risk theater, unless you're really, really producing assessments that inform decisions. So, and the challenge is really, it's a large challenge because you're rarely communicating risk to one person. It's usually multiple agents, multiple stakeholders. So that makes it even more challenging. And our objective when we're communicating is to kind of design the environment where decisions are being made, and design it in a way where decisions can be made, quickly but objectively and in a positive way. So you have to understand your audience, like Alan said, different groups and different stakeholders are going to care about different things. So you have to understand who you're talking to, what their decision-making strategies are, what information they truly need to make that decision, and then just leave the other stuff, kind of to the wayside, or put it in an appendix or something like that, because you really just want to give them what they need to make the decision and execute the decision, because that's really what we're doing here in risk management. So executives, they're trained to load shed and only focus on the things that they really, really need to know, right? Their attention span, they've got a lot of things to worry about. So show them what they need. But when you're talking to an operational team, well, those likely are the teams that are going to be carrying out all of these risk mitigation strategies. So they might need to get more technical, more under the covers, but the same foundational elements fall into place there. You have to make things easy for your stakeholders, and you have to give them the information that they need to make the decision. And none of the extra fluff, right? That's really what we want to do with risk quantification. Tell a nice narrative and then get to the decision and execute what we need to.
Yeah. And I like that you're both highlighting both the science and the art of risk management, because that risk theater, I think, is a great analogy too. And saying, yes, and we have all these, we've done all the scientific work, we've crunched the numbers, we've run the analysis. We're not going to necessarily, I don't like to use the word, but bore you with the details. But here's the presentation. Here's what you need to know for you specifically, and here's what the business needs to know. And also getting that, having that transparency and that openness in all of your assumptions is a good point too, Zach. About the more that you allow that to happen, I think the more objective things become and less subjective, because you're sharing more information and more details, and you can get feedback on more things. So I think that's a great point as well.
I wanted to add one more thing there that I think is important. One thing that I've gotten in my experience doing fair and risk quantification for a while is you can't get offended if you're talking to a stakeholder and they're kind of like, hey, get to the point, right? Tell me what you want me to do. I understand all this great work that you did, and I'm not downplaying that work, but I'm trying to get along with my day. I'm trying to get along to the next thing. So tell me what I need to know so that we can kind of move on. Don't get offended when that happens, because it will. And when that happens, just know that you did what you were supposed to do, right? You got that stakeholder to make a decision, and you should take that as a plus.
100%. Definitely agree with you. In life, sometimes that needs to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, guys, we have this meeting coming up, the first meeting of the Seattle chapter coming up on March 13th, in about a month from when we're recording this. And want to just hear from you both. What is your top goal of diving into this and starting this chapter? What are you looking forward to the most in leading this and starting with a new community?
Yeah, I can kick things off. So the idea of this was really came out of FairCon in Washington D.C. Last October, whereby by chance Zach and I ended up sitting next to each other at one of the dinners, and we started just having this very casual conversation around what we're each doing in our own organizations as it relates to quantifying risk and some of the great work that we're doing. And it was a great conversation. I think we both learned a lot during that time, and really just connected with each other professionally, and then also somewhat personally, and getting to know each other. So from my perspective, that's what I'd love to see happen as we begin to grow out this Seattle chapter of FAIR, is sharing ideas, connecting with like-minded people that are having the same challenges. Just today, I had a conversation with somebody on my team around third-party risk and how we can leverage some of the capabilities that FAIR and some of the solutions offer relative to third-party risk. And I suggested to him, well, let's talk about that when we all come together in March. So yeah, that's really, from my perspective, that's really it right there.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of echo that. We want it to be an inclusive environment, right? We want people to come and be involved. We love to see as many people in person as we can. Of course, that's always the goal here. But we really want to make this chapter, by the people and for the people. We want to know what you all want to learn. We don't want to be the ones deciding what all these talks are every week. We want people to provide their input to make sure that they're getting value out of it. And most importantly, we want to share ideas and find out what each other is doing, so that we can kind of take ideas and learn things and just help solve this really, really challenging problem together. Because that's, I think, what's gonna get us there.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you both taking the time to talk today. I appreciate you both stepping up to lead a chapter, to start one and to lead one. Really appreciate it from my own personal self and support of the FAIR Institute. And anybody listening, if you're interested in starting your own chapter, we have information on that. If you want to come to FairCon 2025 in New York on November 4th and 5th in New York City, to meet other folks if you're not in the Seattle area, and come and maybe you can make a connection like Alan and Zach did, and you'll never know who you'll meet there. So that's another little shameless plug I'll put in there. But for anybody in the Seattle chapter that's interested in attending the meeting, please sign up and RSVP. If you're a part of another chapter, we have meetings that happen every quarter. And if you have any questions about any resources, you're always free to reach out through the Fair Institute website. So Alan and Zach, again, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciated the conversation today and look forward to working with you both to build a very successful Seattle chapter.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.